As the 21st century began, human evolution was at a turning point. Natural selection, the process by which the strongest, the smartest, the fastest reproduced in greater numbers than the rest, a process which had once favored the noblest traits of man, now began to favor different traits. Most science fiction of the day predicted a future that was more civilized and more intelligent. But as time went on, things seemed to be heading in the opposite direction, a dumbing down. How did this happen? Evolution does not necessarily reward intelligence, with no natural predators to thin the herd.
Hey, here are 5 stupid things I've noticed about the 9/11 truth movement. Its pretensions to legitimacy. Have you seen those ads where they have photographs of people and they say things like, "I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I'm a structural engineer," or "I'm an Air Force pilot, and I don't think we've been told the whole story about 9/11. 9/11 truthers love to talk about how many people with advanced degrees they have in their movement, how many structural engineers or architects or military personnel or demolition experts. And out of context, admittedly, the numbers are kind of impressive. Architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth touts over 1,600 architects and engineers having signed on to ally themselves with that group.
It's actually up to over 2,800 architects and engineers. And that's on top of the many pilots, firefighters, and military who are challenging the narrative. And for the record, I rarely bring them up. Not because I lack respect for what they're doing, but because I feel it's unnecessary. Since the evidence is so overwhelming, I believe one does not require expertise in a field.
Of course, just as when creationists and climate change deniers brag about how many smart people agree with them,
this is clearly someone willing to reach really far.
once you realize that the truthers only account for just a minuscule sliver of the total number of people in their respective fields,
how many realize that they're probably risking their careers and livelihoods for their strong beliefs of how absurd the official story is? And I'd like to add just how extremely difficult it is to find anyone to publicly debate with the government's stance. Also, I'm leaving something important out.
Sooner or later, the people in this country are going to realize the government does not give a fuck about them. Government doesn't care about you or your children or your rights or your welfare or your safety. It simply doesn't give a fuck about you. It's interested in its own power. That's the only thing, keeping it and expanding it wherever possible.
Who better to say it than Mr. Carlin?
the numbers kind of lose their edge.
I can tell that somebody's lost their edge of basic math and physics.
I sound like a dick or nothing, but it says on your chart that you're fucked up. You talk like a fag, and your shit's all retarded.
Calls for investigations that have already been conducted. Every year on the anniversary of 9/11, truthers will still stage protests and hold up signs bearing slogans like, "Investigate 9/11."
Just around the corner from the official commemoration was a crowd of several hundred people with a very different message.
13 years later, a growing number of Americans say they want the truth about what happened on September 11th, 2001.
Protesters like U.S. Marine Corps veteran Joe Sato say they believe forces other than Al-Qaeda were involved in the attacks.
I think it was orchestrated, no doubt. I don't believe the official story one bit. You know, the way the towers fell, how they fell straight down, path of most resistance, free fall speed.
Or investigate Building 7.
Some of the participants said the report of the 9/11 Commission is full of holes, as for example, it does not mention the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7 in the attacks.
Never mind, I guess, that 9/11 is already the most investigated event in the history of investigated events.
To investigate 9/11, 9/11 was perpetrated by people within our own government.
Because who knows, maybe that next investigation will be the one that disproves all the other investigations. You know, the ones that determined that the attacks were the results of terrorists hijacking planes and crashing them into shit?
On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world using a satellite phone and a laptop directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York, while in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the Budget Analyst Office where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-TECH, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors.
Of course, the mere fact that an investigation's findings don't back up the delusional conspiracy theories pushed by truthers.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
So Steve claims truthers are the ones who ignore evidence, while believing every word as told by the people who had the most to gain.
I don't believe in conspiracy theories. I have faith in our government.
Who are the delusional ones again?
Is enough for truthers to disqualify it and ignore it and call for another investigation.
Others said certain entities greatly benefited from the 9/11 attacks, and the facts don't add up.
Major corporations in the arms industry, the oil industry, the media, the insurance industry, banking industry have benefited enormously from 9/11. We encourage everybody to look and see who runs those corporations, who runs those industries, what are their ties to government.
Investigate cognitive bias, anyone.
Somebody needs to take a serious look in the mirror.
There's that fag talk we talked about.
The obsession with Building 7. What about Building 7? Why won't they investigate Building 7? What happened to Building 7? There were 3 skyscrapers that fell that day, not 2. Larry Silverstein. Pull it.
Let's hear Mr. Silverstein's actual words, delivered for our benefit in the 2002 PBS documentary, America Rebuilds.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
What about the CIA office in Building 7? What are they trying to hide? What brought down Building 7? A plane never even hit Building 7.
Lou is joining us now with an update. Lou.
Yes, with the destruction of 7 World Trade Center, we saw it collapse on TV late this afternoon. That building housed the city OEM bunker, Office of Emergency Management bunker, that was supposed to be bomb-proof. It was supposed to be the place where the city was going to direct a response to an emergency like this, and it is now in rubble.
Which brings me to...
Don't worry, Skrull. Now there are plenty of tards out there living really kick-ass lives.
That controlled demolition bullshit. You know, to me, this might be the most irritating 9/11 conspiracy theory, and they're all fucking irritating. Never mind how preposterous it is to see commercial airliners slam head-on into skyscrapers.
Donald, you're probably the best known builder, particularly of great buildings in the city. There's a great deal of question about whether or not the damage and the ultimate destruction of the buildings was caused by the airplanes, by architectural defect, or possibly by bombs or aftershocks. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it was an architectural defect. You know, the World Trade Center was always known as a very, very strong building. Don't forget, that took a big bomb in the basement. Now, the basement is the most vulnerable place because that's your foundation. And it withstood that. And I got to see that area about 3 or 4 days after it took place because one of my structural engineers actually took me for a tour because he did the building. And I said, I can't believe it. The building was standing solid and half of the columns were blown out. I mean, so this was an unbelievably powerful building.
And then afterwards tell people with a straight face that it was probably a series of precisely placed thermite charges installed secretly that caused the buildings to collapse.
Was it the first plane or the second plane?
That was the first plane. The second plane, no second plane. It was a bomb. Bomb in the building, not second plane.
We made it outside. We made it about a block.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, instead of popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah,
as if they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running.
What happened?
He was in an explosion. He was in the lobby, and the third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
So 2 planes and explosives that were in the building, is that correct?
That is the working theory at this point. That is still unconfirmed, but that is what the FBI is going on it.
We've heard reports of secondary explosions after the aircraft impacted, whether in fact there wasn't something else at the base of the towers that in fact were the coup de grace to bring them to the ground.
At 10:30, I tried to leave the building, but as soon as I got outside, I heard a second explosion and another rumble. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last.
Like, it sounded like gunfire, you know, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden, 3 big explosions.
The chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department, he received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. There was another explosion which took place. According to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building.
No, that's not the most irritating part. The most irritating part is when people will show you video of the towers collapsing and they'll say, see, looks just like a controlled demolition, doesn't it? No, it doesn't look just like a controlled demolition.
Who is this man?
Controlled demolitions start at the bottom. The towers fall from the bottom up. The Twin Towers both clearly buckled at points right near where the impacts of the planes occurred. Fancy that. Controlled demolitions cause buildings to fall straight down, and despite bizarre claims to the contrary by truthers, both Twin Towers clearly did not collapse straight down into their footprints.
Saying that things we saw with our own eyes didn't happen.
I'm 4 blocks north of the World Trade Center. The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
That should be it.
Thanks very much. Completely collapsed.
The whole side has collapsed?
The whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed?
The building has collapsed.
Now people are gathering in large groups. In fact, in one corner, I saw a group of people actually holding hands and praying. As I stand on the Manhattan Bridge, which is closed, it is open to pedestrian traffic. Some people are walking across, but there's just no way for them to. As I look at something, I can't. Is that the building is going? Is that the building going down? Is that the second building of the World Trade Center going down?
Yes, that is the second. That is the second tower. That is the second tower.
It's a huge flow of smoke that came out of the middle of the building, and then the building just disappeared in the smoke.
I guess we'll never know the truth.
There's absolutely no reason to even start down this road unless you are already a delusional fucking conspiracy theorist.
Okay, number one, Your Honor. Just look at him.
He talks like a fag, too.
It doesn't tell us what really happened. So let's say the official story isn't true. Let's say that the 9/11 Commission report is part of just a big old government cover-up. What really happened that day, truthers? Can you tell me? If the planes weren't hijacked by Al-Qaeda terrorists, who were they hijacked by? The Bush administration? The CIA? The Illuminati? The Jews?
A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins. But when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 9/11 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information.
Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly said the September 11th attacks have been good for Israel. Netanyahu said, quote, we're benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq, end quote.
Were there even people aboard the planes, or were the planes remote-controlled drones? What happened to the passengers on the planes? Were they offloaded in some mysterious location and secretly killed? If that's the case, where? By whom? Was the Pentagon hit by a plane, or was the Pentagon hit by a ground-launched missile? What really happened that day, truthers? Tell me, explain it to me, show me minute by minute what happened that day. You tell me the real story. Are you even interested in that? Are you capable of that? Or are you just going to continue to hide behind your shield of just asking questions? Hey, it's not our job. We're just asking questions. What's wrong with asking questions? And there's nothing wrong with asking questions, provided that you are honest enough to accept the answers to those questions, no matter what they may be. And I submit to you, 9/11 Truth Movement, that you are not honest enough to accept the answers to your questions, no matter what they might be. And that being the case, my question to you is, what fucking good are you people? The hardest part is only picking 5. Catch you next time.
The hardest part for me was attempting to keep this video short, considering the amount of evidence I could have provided. And finally, I would like to thank Steve Shives for displaying just how gullible, dishonest, delusional, and most of all, just how massively hypocritical some are that believe in the official story.
The writer behind Idiocracy is a little concerned because it turns out that his 2006 cult favorite, Idiocracy, ended up being more than just satire. It ended up being real life. Now, these are comments from Eaton Cohen, who tweeted about how devastating our current state is. And apparently he says, I never expected Idiocracy to become a documentary.